we forget what a horrid death stoning is. As you know, it's still practiced in some countries. It's actually prescribed in the Quran. And one can hardly imagine a more painful way to go. And this was our first witness, for that is the meaning of martyr, martus, witness. But he's a witness also in the way that he took it. He, perhaps without knowing it, repeats the Lord's own words on the cross, commending his spirit into the hands of the Father. And then again, his last words seem to be very similar to those of the Lord himself. The word given is, do not hold this sin against them. And we notice that immediately after we have a reference to Saul guarding the clothes of those who are at it. Now that's not accidental, because it would seem that that prayer at that moment had an effect on the whole world. It merited for Saul, who was responsible, at least in part, the grace of being touched. Obviously he wasn't a man of bad will, but he wasn't illuminated and his energy was going on the wrong side and in the wrong game. So this prayer of the first martyr obtained from glory that miracle which gave us about half the New Testament. Saul became Paul, and that energy then was well orientated. Indeed, we have a puzzling word from the Lord himself when he says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So Jesus was identifying himself already there with Stephen. That applies also to us, by the way. If we upset willingly somebody who has Jesus in his heart, he feels it. And we wouldn't speak nastily to the tabernacle. Well, we are tabernacles ourselves when in a state of grace, and the Lord feels what we say to each other as though said to him. We can't be holy and loving Jesus and upsetting him in practice in the next person to me. And if it's happening, it's pure illusion, our spiritual life. Hence, if during a liturgical celebration the end product is a wounded soul next to us because we wanted to get it correct at all costs, and no matter who is upsetting us, we actually don't care what's going on in that person's heart if we upset that person in return. It's far more serious sometimes than what we're trying to correct, and it happens. And also, in a community of people given to the Lord's praise and worship, if there is not peace and warmth there, again, the Lord, who's in the midst, is not being honoured, he's being wounded. So the test of our authenticity also is that. Would Jesus own our words? We must not say a single word that he wouldn't. That was actually written in the monastic rule we had in France, in the Chartreuse. The prior was never to allow himself a single word that the Lord would not take upon himself. It's a huge responsibility. But then we have one little verse in the account which could escape our notice if we're not attentive. It's this, that these persecutors looked at him, because by now they were raged and they were about to stone him. They looked at him and they saw that his face resembled that of an angel. What does that mean? Does it mean that perhaps, as the first witness took his life and blood, under torment, that perhaps he was given a special grace, that was the glory of martyrdom forevermore, that those who go on the cross with Jesus like that somehow are so closely configured to him that they have an immediate entry into glory with a maximum of glory. It would seem that something of that does actually happen. Hence it is that a martyr is more easily canonized than any other person. And they have power. Just think what it means to go from martyrdom to the last breath of torment, to open the eyes of the soul in conquered eternity, and to be embraced by the Lord who said, "This cross you shared with me, and I was suffering with you. Enter into the glory of your Master." So martyrdom is a glorious, glorious death. Do you know that things have happened in the realm of martyrdom over the centuries? Because there have always been waves of persecution, and one of the early waves had this curious scene. The Christians were being rounded up and martyred. This is going back to the Roman times. And one of the executioners saw something. They had a row of Christians, and they were all about to be martyred, and he saw over the heads of each a crown. Now, I forget the details, but I think it went like this. It was to be a slow death, and I think one of them hesitated and withdrew. And when he saw these crowns prepared over their heads and saw that one was not taking it, he himself, one of these Romans, jumped in and got with the martyrs so as not to lose that crown that he could see was to be won. So he had an instant conversion and martyrdom. And on it would go. The martyrs in the last century were more numerous than any other century of church history. They had all the communist persecution, Nazi persecution, all these countries over the world, huge numbers who went into that state of bliss. And they're the unnamed martyrs. We were given things to read actually in France when it was going on, in the 70s and 80s, when communism was still strong, because we used to get material from the Church of the Aid to the Church in Need, and it was all happening still. Many priests were suffering terribly. And we don't know, for instance, what happened in Lithuania, because a Catholic country like Lithuania would not compromise with the state, whereas Russia did more easily. So terrible things happened in those countries, and no one heard about them. This then is the beginning of a huge army. A huge, huge army. I just conclude. We're celebrating in the Old Rite, and the Old Rite always ends with the last Gospel, which by the way is very suitable at this time of year. The Word being made flesh. But every time I say it, I am taken back straight away to the picture I have in my larger chapel in the Hermitage where you were on last night. Because on the wall there is the picture of our local martyr. It was a Benedictine, a Welshman who spoke Welsh. He'd become a Catholic, and we actually celebrated in the chapel where he would have been a student in Oxford, St John's College. And he wanted to get back to Wales but never could. He got as far as England, was caught. He was actually released first time, or got out anyway, and eventually tracked down again. But when he was, that time it was quite dramatic. He was actually in a hidey hole celebrating in secret in one of these recusant places. And they intuited where the chapel, the hidden chapel was, and they bashed the door down, banging it, open up in the name of the king. And because he was still in his robes and at the altar, they got him. And he was precisely at the last gospel. Very shortly afterwards, in a matter of days, he was there at the Tyburn tree, hanged, drawn and quartered, simply for being a priest. So it's important to remember that when we come to the altar, that this meant torture and rack for many, many priests. We get it easily, but it's the same treasure. Let's never, ever take our faith and practice